Hello everybody, and welcome to History Bite number 129, dated December 11th, 2020. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. This History Bite is entitled, Was the Louisiana Purchase Constitutional? Now, I almost have to hold back my laughter when presenting that question because the obvious answer is yes, of course, it was constitutional, all right? But it may surprise you to know that in the context of 1803, lots of people didn't think that it was, and others significantly questioned the constitutionality of the land acquisition. There were many people in that time period who strongly frowned upon the federal government exercising authority that was not specifically enumerated in the Constitution. And indeed, that's a debate that continues to this day. But in the modern era, we are much more accepting of broad federal power. There is no specific enumerated power in the Constitution for the federal government to acquire new land, okay? Land that had never before been owned by the United States, all right? And thus, the Louisiana Purchase being the first foreign land acquisition that we acquired, it troubled many, okay? That leads me to discuss the two schools of thought at the time with respect to how people thought that the federal government should behave. The first school of thought were people known as strict constructionists. These people did not believe that the federal government should exercise any authority outside of its specifically enumerated powers in the Constitution. Okay? In other words, if the Constitution did not specifically say the federal government could do something, then it couldn't. AKA, if it doesn't say you can, you can't. All right? And then the other school of thought were dominated by people known as loose constructionists. These people believed that not only did the federal government have its enumerated powers in the Constitution, but it also had implied powers, okay? A fact bolstered by the necessary and proper clause found in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 of the Constitution. The federal government obviously wasn't hindered specifically by what was enumerated in the Constitution, but it had the duty, okay, to provide for the general maintenance of the country in ways well beyond what the Constitution specifically stated. Okay, these people believed in a broad interpretation of federal power. And their mindset more or less was, if the Constitution didn't specifically deny the federal government a particular access to something, then it could do it. If it didn't say I can't do it, then I can. All right? These were two very distinct schools of thought that did not overlap with each other. Okay? And ironically, President Thomas Jefferson, who was, of course, the president who initiated the Louisiana Purchase, was a member of the first school of thought. He was a strict constructionist. And typically Jefferson was very critical of the federal government exercising authority that it did not specifically have. However, as I've said many times with respect to political views, no one is 100% in any direction. People are always willing to make compromises for things they really want. And Jefferson badly wanted the Louisiana Purchase. So he initially found it a little hard to reconcile with his strict constructionist beliefs, okay, that this purchase was constitutional, until he remembered that little aspect of the Constitution known as the Treaty Clause, found in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 of the Constitution. All right? The Treaty Clause reads as follows. Speaking of the President, he shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. Okay? So, the President has the power to make treaties, and they become valid upon the ratification by the Senate, 2/3 of senators present, so 66% of present senators, okay? So, as such, a treaty was made for the purchase of the Louisiana Territory, thus justifying and affirming the constitutionality of that land acquisition, okay? That was the most prominent, arguably, land acquisition the United States ever made, all right? The Louisiana Territory was over 800,000 plus square miles of pure wilderness. So large, in fact, that it doubled the size of the United States of America at the time, all right? The Louisiana Purchase arguably spearheaded the movement for Western expansion, something that would continue for the rest of the 19th century, okay? We paid $15 million for the territory from the French, okay? And everything was entirely finalized by the end of 1803, okay? But we're not going to get too heavy into the details of the Louisiana Purchase. That's for a specific history bite. The purpose of this video is to dispel myths that the purchase may have been unconstitutional by referencing other provisions of the Constitution, which effectively affirm, though not explicitly state, that the framers of the Constitution intended the federal government to be able to acquire foreign land, okay, via diplomatic means as well as military means, okay? The first section implies that the federal government was intended to acquire foreign land via the Territories Clause found in Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 of the Constitution, all right? And it reads, quite simply, it reads, the Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States. Okay, and nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or any particular state. Okay, so the framers wisely reasoned that with time the United States would grow and therefore acquire new territory, and thus a mechanism had to be provided in the Constitution to regulate that new territory, as we see with the Territories Clause. The next implied presumption that we would acquire new land, okay, was from the New State Clause, also found in Article 4, Section 3, and in Clause 1. It reads, new states may be admitted by the Congress into this union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state be formed by the junction of two or more states, or parts of states, without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned, as well as of the Congress, all right? So that obviously enforces the principle that with these new territories, eventually they would reach population minimums and become new states, okay? So with this new land, all right, they would become new states, and thus a mechanism had to be put in the Constitution to allow for new states to be admitted to the Union. Obviously, all right, framers did not intend this to be a limiting principle to the territory we had at the time the Constitution went into effect. It would have rendered itself obsolete very quickly, okay? And last but not least, we go to Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 11, 12, and 13, where the Congress is given the power to declare war, okay, as well as raise and support armies, okay, provide and maintain a navy, make rules for the regulation of the land and naval forces, all right? All of these provisions wisely see that eventually the United States would indeed declare war and engage in armed conflict with other countries. As a natural result of war, land seizures from the enemy are quite common, almost a given. And they knew that these land seizures were not likely to be relinquished, okay? Thus adding new land by ways of military conquest with the power to declare war, all right? So the framers obviously understood that with time America would grow and acquire new land, okay? This is an implied natural right of any country to acquire new land, okay, whether it be by diplomatic means or by military means, okay. All of those bases, excuse me, are covered in the Constitution, okay. And thus, suggestions that the federal government did not have that power are absolutely bogus and without foundation or merit. The framers knew, okay, that the United States would grow diplomatically and militarily, okay, and thus implied authority is given to the federal government to acquire new land, and not only acquire it, but regulate it and admit it to the American nation as one of the guys by way of being new states. All right. So that's pretty much it with respect to the constitutionality of the Louisiana Purchase. Okay. Though it is not an explicitly stated authority of the federal government to acquire new land for the country, it is certainly an implied power of the federal government. Okay. Via the Territories Clause. Okay. Via the New State Clause, as well as via the power to declare war, all right? Thus, we have the ability to acquire land inherently. The federal government has that ability via both diplomatic and military means, okay? So, and of course, as well as the Treaty Clause, okay? And I didn't mention that in a later point because these are the other means of implied authority, not stated. But of course, the Treaty Clause, which was the mechanism Jefferson used to justify the Louisiana Purchase, is certainly also a means of acquiring new land. Again, in the diplomatic format, all right? As opposed to declaring war in the military format. Okay? So those are all the ways: the Treaty Clause, the Territories Clause, the New State Clause, and the War Clause, all right? All the ways the federal government is inherently empowered to acquire new land, though not specifically stated in the Constitution, not explicitly stated as a given power, all right? But the power is there. So I thank you so much for listening to this History Bite. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube page, just hit that little red button right there, all right? And click the little bell, all right? And we are in business. I appreciate you listening. I hope you learned something from this. Take care, stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next History Bite. Peace.